When Israel was actually occupying the West Bank and the Gaza Strip completely, nobody benefited from that more than the Palestinians. This is not the reason to support the occupation. The reason to support it is because the Palestinians continue to attack Israelis with the intention of killing all the Jews in Israel and eliminating the state of Israel. But it is another point that you will not hear in public discourse about this war unless you are a regular viewer of this channel. Welcome to the reality show, day 179 of the war in Israel. I said at the end of the Daily Objective, we have a positive topic for today's show, and this is it. We also have a real life occupier with us on this panel. I will start with him. Jonathan, welcome to the reality show. What is it like being an occupier of Palestinian land?
It's very hot. It's 30 degrees. It's like hell. Maybe it's rather appropriate. But I didn't know Tel Aviv is also considered part of the occupied territories now. I see. Yeah, it's a very nice, positive topic indeed, Razi. And from the outset, I would like to say, I think what is missed among the public discourse is first of all understanding of what occupation means. The anti-Jewish, anti-Israel crowd says that occupation in and of itself is a moral crime. That's inaccurate. That's untrue. Occupation is a method of achieving a specific goal. You occupy a territory if you want to pacify it, if you want to get rid of a threat. That's what the US did when it occupied areas in Germany, or all of Germany. That's what the US did when it occupied Japan after World War II. So the reason for occupying is to get rid of threats, to fulfill your purpose as a state, which is to defend your citizens' rights. So you have to go to a territory and pacify, get rid of all the threats, and hold it so long as the threats will never come back, or eventually integrate it, because they lose the claim for that territory. Once you initiate force from that territory, you are bound to lose it because of what you did to this country from that territory. You don't deserve it. So that's what I want to say from the outset, and then we'll take it from there.
Richard.
Well, I think there's many different ways you can tackle this. One of the things I did when preparing for this episode was to look up some details on the settler colonial argument for these things, which is a rabbit hole in itself that I nearly disappeared down and never came back out of alive. Because no matter how much you explore that topic, it always is, every sentence of it is dripping with Marxism, because that's all it is, really. It's all about power structures, and it's about reparations. It's about declaring different ways by which somebody can claim some random date in the past is the point that they're concerned with, and therefore they can rewrite what's done in the present based on that decision. They can decide what the criteria are, and they can reallocate reality accordingly today. And some of those things said under that were quite revealing, I thought. I mean, the settler colonialism description that I discovered was on an ongoing system of power that perpetuates genocide and repression of indigenous peoples and cultures. And it split it into four categories. Even these four categories were telling: racism, white supremacy, which is apparently different from racism, quite how, I don't know. Heteropatriarchy, which is just that straight white men rule the world, basically, and that's a bad thing. And of course, the real enemy of the four, capitalism. And that's what you see in all this. And when we're going to get onto it in a little bit, I'm sure. But when looking at the UN document, which analyzes one particular UN document, which analyzes what should be done, and discusses the occupation in Gaza, as it calls it. It talks a lot about reparations, and that is the same thing being transferred into the main UN body, which is the tyranny of the majority trying to exercise the Marxism of these crackpots.
So just quickly, Richard, what you were reading now is from the description of settler colonial, where?
I can't remember exactly where it was. It was settler colonialism and understanding what the term means. It was a particular academic on that subject. I didn't bother to record their name, and I certainly don't want to credit them with anything academic.
All right, Marco.
Well, that certainly was an academic. Yeah, the issue here with the word occupation is that implies that somebody has been treated unfairly, and in this case, the so-called Palestinian, and let's make it clear, Palestine was never a state. Palestinian is not an ethnicity. It's just a group of Arab people that happen to live in the Middle East. Now, we can go back 2,000 years if you like, but if you take the end of World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was smashed, the area which is now covered by Syria and bits of Syria, Jordan and Israel, was given to Great Britain under the Mandate. That was the territory called the Mandate. And after the Mandate was disbanded and the UN took over, Israel declared independence. But already by that point, at the beginning of last century, already people were settling in what was, after the First War, the first creation of the State of Israel, effectively. And Israel became a state officially in 1948, when it declared independence after the Mandate. Now, the people who were supposed to live in those areas, immediately, how did they react? Did they try to find a compromise? No, they just went to war with Israel, trying to annihilate it, trying to destroy the people who just survived 3 years earlier the Holocaust. So the first reaction was that. Here, now the occupation of Israel of these areas ruled by theocracies or uncivilized, effectively people who just want to destroy and kill, is very much moral in the sense that a state which doesn't have as its main purpose the protection of the rights of the individual is an illegal state. So a state who comes along and decides to impose freedom and protect individual rights has got the right to take over this illegal state. And this is the position where we're now. Like it or not, the Muslim presence, or the so-called Arab, the so-called Palestinians, are trying to bring us back to the Middle Ages thanks to their culture. Israel is trying to move towards a future, to move on, and they absolutely do not want this to happen. We've seen it over and over again.
So we have a super chat from Alexis. Thank you, Alexis. We'll get to it in a second because it actually leads into what I was going to go to next. But there was a comment in the chat that said, UN disagrees with your conclusion. Occupation is illegal, ergo immoral. Now, I know using Latin always makes everything sound super intelligent, but I don't think it means what you think it means here. I hope for your sake that you got it wrong, because no, if everything that is once something is illegal, it is therefore immoral. First of all, you have conflicting moralities because you have conflicting laws in different places, and there are some things that are illegal in many places that are definitely not immoral. And what is immoral in many, many cases is the fact that government even legislates certain things. So that is a point on that.
Appeal to authority. The fact that the UN says doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah, the men who legislate have decided that it is wrong, therefore, ergo, it is wrong. No, that's not how it works.
Well, you could legally kill people under the Nazi regime, but it wasn't moral, was it?
Yeah, exactly. So Alexis, thank you for the super chat. He asks, was there a case for occupation prior to October 7th? I have a clear answer to that, but I'm going to go to Jonathan first, because Jonathan, if you can let us know what you think, but also let us know tell us a little bit about the history of the occupation.
With pleasure. So the formal occupation started, of course, with the foundation of Israel, right? The moment the Jews had a state, they already become evil. But when this idea really, most people, they go back to 1967, once Israel gained control over the West Bank and the Gaza, which they had control over even before that. So why did Israel have the West Bank? Why? Well, the country of Jordan chose to join the Six-Day War despite warnings from Israel not to do it. The Jordanians decided to launch an offensive into Israel in 1967. They lost, and therefore Israel took over the West Bank, Jerusalem, and that entire area. The same case with the Golan Heights, which is also occupied territory. The same deal. Syria, well, this time Israel launched a preemptive strike against Syria, but the war was pending, and it took over the Golan Heights. The same deal with the Sinai Peninsula, and which is unfortunately now back in the hands of Egypt, and Gaza. So the reason that there was an occupation was that because foreign agents wanted to destroy the country of Israel, and as a result, there was a war. Israel won the war, and this territory was very important also from strategic perspective. So Israel couldn't have given back the Golan Heights because it not just for the strategic disadvantages, but it's just a really good piece of land for defensive purposes. So that's essentially why Israel controls these territories. And yeah, and since then, the people in the West Bank, a lot of them have been living under martial law, which is where this notion of living under occupation really comes from, I think. The people of Gaza were also under that similar situation. And since the Oslo Accord, Israel withdrew from a lot of the West Bank. In 2005, it withdrew completely from Gaza, so there was no official military control over Gaza since 2005. And since 1995 in Oslo, the West Bank is divided to areas A, B, and C. A is totally in control of the Palestinian authorities. That is the various militias, ARCUK, defense services that operate there. And area B under control of the Israeli military, but civilian control of the Palestinians. And C, which is where the settlements are, where we have basically it's Israel, but there's still a border there. So there are a lot of different restrictions. The people of the West Bank, in order to enter Israel, they can only enter if they have a work permit. They have a different passport. It's essentially a different country. We have to cross the border. If I go there, it's only like a 2-hour drive, 90-minute drive. If I go there, I cannot enter. I will be stopped at the border for my own sake because I will be killed. So that's the situation. Is there two different independent entities in the West Bank and Israel, and the same with Hamas. If you go to Hamas, that's a different country. You cross the border. So that's so much for the history. There was another part to the question, Razi.
Well, that was my part of the question. Alexis's question was there a case for occupation?
Yeah, so for the self-defense, we had to defend ourselves. But you know how far the green line was from Tel Aviv? It's like 30 kilometers from where the Jordanian army sat and Tel Aviv. It's impossible to have a sovereign country.
And somewhere, I think maybe Netanya or somewhere there, it's like
Even
8
less,
kilometers from the sea, basically.
Exactly. And the IDF was constantly harassed by the Syrians in the Kinneret, when it used to be the Golan Heights used to be by the Syrians. So there's a lot of strategical military self-defense justifications for why we have to control it, so that we won't repeat the Holocaust, as what they essentially wanted to do. So yes.
Well, I just quickly want to say, just a general, very, very quick history of the situation in the Middle East is the UN partition plan announced in 1947 was accepted by the Zionist movement. They were happy to have a state, a state that was much smaller than what it was after the Arabs launched an attack trying to eliminate Israel, and you know, the eventual armistice line was what is now called the 67 borders, and then of course Israel was, you know, attacked again and again, and eventually did what they did in 67 and expanded and still begged for peace. And so yeah, that is
Yeah, and the war, good to mention that the war, that the Israel War of Independence, the war that the Arab army started, was not in the name of establishing a Palestinian state. They wanted, it was a land grab, basically. They wanted each to grab their own part. Nobody talked about the Palestinian state back then. They just wanted to destroy the Zionist entity. It was an entirely nihilistic war. There was no positive goal there. So
they still just want to destroy the Zionist entity, and it's still an entirely nihilistic war. But now they are the Palestinian people, so it's a different kind of thing, supposedly. Although
because it kept failing, they kept failing with that, doing it conventionally. So they are trying now the guerrilla warfare, which was successful in Vietnam. They took inspiration from that, and now we have our different variation on the same theme.
Richard.
I think in answer to Alexis's question, we could cite the episode done the other day on the TDO, on the Daily Objective, about Japan, for example, and some of the comparisons there of occupation following the Second World War. There are some similarities to the situations we're talking here, some certain differences, and definitely some lessons. First of all, it involved the absolute defeat of Japan. Secondly, it involved a very visible presence on the streets of Japan. Yes, it was for a limited time. It lasted 7 years, and there was a ladder of progress for people to emerge from it as they demonstrated their you know, the change in the culture and the fact that they accepted the new rules which they were living under. The emperor was given a pen to sign the new constitution, and as a defeated leader, and also in terms of the Shintoism side of it, and the fact he was the literal god on earth, he was signing the defeat of and acknowledging the end of the Holy War. Now that makes a big difference with what we're talking about here, because you can't hand Allah a pen and get him to sign the new constitution. And there is still going to be all the other Muslim and Arab states that surround the whole area that are going to offer no agreement to what's signed. And even if you could find a body that could represent Gazans, there would be disagreement between which body that should be and which individual should sign it anyway. But one of the key differences, and I think this is where you could argue that it's UNRWA that have been occupying Gaza, not Israel, is that the Americans had control over the textbooks and the curriculum taught in schools. And we know that UNRWA have done that in Gaza, and we know what that's led to in terms of propaganda and Jew hatred being promoted among the young Palestinians who live there, and the consequences leading all the way up to October the 7th.
Yeah, Jonathan mentioned that in 48 there weren't any Palestinians because they've been invented in the 60s after the 67 war, I think. And that the term Palestinian, Palestine as a country is the same as Camelot, just a made-up country, which never was. But the whole point this was made up by the UN in order to perpetuate the situation forever, and also to create more, to feather the nest or the fat cats that benefit from the altruism going on. You know, if you have a humanitarian crisis, you will have to need means and money in order to deal with it. And by doing that, all these people sit in their big fat, I was going to say big fat houses in New York, are making actually massive amount of money, totally unchecked. They do what they want. Often, you know, they even indulge in total bribery, like happened with the money and the oil in Iraq in the 90s, and they just get away with it because they're totally unaccountable. But they keep fomenting this kind of local conflicts because, you know, if we had peace, like the accord that before October the 7th, Israel was signing with Saudi Arabia, that would have meant less conflict. That would have meant, oh gosh, we have to get a proper job now. So there's no interest on the side of the UN to actually deal with this. In fact, that they keep setting up bodies in favor of this so-called Palestine thing, which effectively is, let's make sure Israel will never deal with the situation. Let's make sure people on the ground will never be able to deal with their own life, to even try and choose the rational solution, by which I mean being productive and live in peace, because it's in everyone's interest to live in peace. And of course, in addition to that, and probably the biggest difference between any other occupation like Japan or Germany, is that the culture of the people involved, i.e. the Arabs and Islam, especially the Islamist nutters that are dotted around the place, is that the whole area is surrounded by theocracies, by people who do not want to have a rational living place, because they of course they thrive on their mysticism and their collectivist murderers culture, and that's one of the main factors that Israel needs to deal with.
Yeah, I mean the UNRWA point, I'm never a fan of saying, oh, these people are getting paid, therefore they don't really mean what they say. But the fact of the matter is, yeah, UNRWA to justify its existence needs Palestinian suffering. There is no UNRWA without Palestinian suffering. That's why they need to make sure they're suffering, and they need to make sure there's Palestinians. So that's why Palestinian refugees. That's why they have their own definition as separate from the general definition of refugees, because it means there are more of them, which means UNRWA needs more funding by its victims in part. And yeah, it is a self-perpetuating, unfortunately, misery. Ram says in the chat, Palestinians terrorizing Israel while being occupied by Egypt in Gaza and Jordan in the West Bank pretty much contradicts the argument that the occupation is the reason for the terror. Yeah, I mean, again, how many of them refer to themselves as Palestinians? I don't know. I think the PLO was formed, was at 64, 63 or something like that. But again, it wasn't I don't know if it was, we're Palestinians, but rather Palestine Liberation Organization as is liberating that area called Palestine. Of course, the term Palestinian was used for Jews as well during the British Mandate of Palestine. The Jews who lived there were Palestinian Jews. So yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat from Rotua asking, why is Israel still bringing food, water, electricity? We are not the people to ask that question, because we've been asking it since October 7th and before. I have no idea. It is if you watch the Daily Objective, which ended a few minutes before this show started, we were talking about the recent incident with the aid truck or aid car that was bombed. And yeah, the very existence of them there with Israel's support and cooperation is aiding and abetting the enemy, and there's no other way that I can imagine looking at that. Jonathan, you mentioned work permits, and so this is one of those things that people present as, look, the Palestinians have their struggle there is like they don't have work, and then only some of them get permits into Israel. Now, people who got work permits into Israel were involved in planning, mapping out the kibbutzim, the areas where Palestinians attacked on October 7th. Historically, there are people with work permits who were involved in terrorism. It is something that Israel, I guess, tries to minimize but cannot possibly prevent. So it's one of those things that you think, yeah, it's got to be a tough life if you can't even get a work permit to a place where there is work. But when it so often results in the murder of innocents, you got to ask, why would Israel, considering its job is to protect Israelis, why would they allow work permits? Jonathan.
Well, first I don't want to, there are a lot of good, hardworking Palestinians working in Israel. They're building buildings, they are construction workers, and a lot of them, they just want to provide for their families. So I don't want to say necessarily anything bad against all of them. The reason I think Israel gives all these work permits for Palestinians is the US. I think the US, it's a real story. The US does not allow Israel to bring workers from other places. There's a lot of we try to bring workers from India, and there's a lot of I've been in touch with someone I know in the construction business in Israel. There's a huge lack of workers, massive lack of workers. We have lines of workers waiting to come to Israel from India, but they are not coming. Why? Because there's pressure from the US and from other international sources about this. Now, this is of course not on them to blame. It is us to blame. We are a sovereign country. We should be able to dictate that. But this is how things are. So there are a lot of things that the US is involved here that should be mentioned. What else about the work permits? We need workers. The Israelis, they don't do these construction works. No Israeli would go and do that. You ask someone, they would never do that. We're kind of they don't like to do the hard work, and the Palestinians are willing to do it. They get very well paid, and they provide for their families. I think it's not the worst thing that we're doing necessarily. Ideally, we wouldn't be in this situation, and we will all be under the same country. And those people who are peaceful, they would just drive to work without having to cross borders and do some construction work. I think that's fine.
Yeah, ideally, but that's not the situation.
No, right now, yeah, right now.
There's no shortage of places.
There's no question.
There's no shortage of places from where people would love to come to Israel and work, and if they get whatever is minimum wage in Israel, it's probably several times what they would get in their country.
Yeah, yeah. And Razi, there's another thing. The Palestinians, they should ask their own government, why do we have to drive to Israel to get work? Why can't we have basic work done in our
their government would say it's because of the occupation.
Yeah, well, so they should uprise and fight against that. There's a terrible injustice.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll happen any day now. Richard.
To the point earlier you were raised in the chat about the water being supplied to Gaza, etc. The answer is obviously altruism, and altruism here plays as ever such a big part in all of the problems that have occurred here. I mean, look at the way in which Israel has responded with things like the Land for Peace Agreement as an altruistic base to that, to the humanitarian aid generally, to hostage negotiations or calls for temporary ceasefires. All of that is based on altruism. And the thing about altruism is that in each occasion, those making the demands very quickly bank the concessions they get, and then drop the supposed reward for those concessions of the moral high ground, very quickly drop that from the discourse and from the history books. So even by the code of altruism, Israel is never granted any checks in the column of altruism, the plus columns, you could put it as, in terms of what it's done for, withdrawing from Gaza and allowing the Palestinians to run Gaza for the last 18 years, for example. And then very quickly, those same people are then foaming at the mouth for the further extractions, which they can claim and demand with the sanction of the victim willingly conceding yet more that will be banked. And then this is how altruism works. It always demands more sacrifice, and that's why it always leads to such lousy outcomes.
And in particular, when it comes to Israel, no concept seems to apply, because even let's go back to occupation. Is anybody bitching about the fact that Turkey has been occupying half of Cyprus for about 50 years now? Is anybody whinging about the fact that Russia has been occupying Crimea for the last 10 years? No, but when it comes to Israel, everything seems to have a different meaning or a different nuance. This whole focus on self-defense that Israel is doing is significantly showing how much actually there is an agenda behind it. Partially it's because in some Western country this year there are a few elections, US, UK, and the EU big super state as well has got an election, so they don't want to be seen to stand up to Muslims in case they lose 5 or 6 votes. But this whole thing is playing very bad in the hand of Israel, who's accepting all this kind of stupidity coming from the West, the kind of stuff that the West will never do on their own. They expect Israel to live by. And Israel, I'm afraid, is going down the route of accepting by default what the West is telling them. That's why the response against Hamas should have been much, much faster and much, much devastating. By now, they should have been thinking about rebuilding what's left of Gaza rather than shall we go and carry on Rafah, because let's not forget the hostages who are still held by Hamas and the people in Gaza.
Yeah, Marco, I just have to say your claim that Turkey is occupying the north of Cyprus is Islamophobic. It perpetuates genocide. It's heterocentric. And what other? I didn't write
sure
it
it's
all.
capitalist as well, because
Oh yeah, it is.
That's okay. Then we can blame the Greeks for occupying the south.
But the Greeks don't they count as white? Anyway, thank you. Thank you to our super chatters. You know, these shows, even non-controversial topics like today, can't be monetized because they are apparently outside of the spectrum of what can be monetized in terms of ad revenue. So super chats are the only YouTube revenue that we're getting at the moment. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Dean. Dean asks, what should Israel do with the West Bank? Do you really think 2 million Arabs should be a part of Israel and get citizenship? What about a Jewish majority? What's the solution for Gaza and the West Bank? I think this is directed at Jonathan, but I am going to answer first. What should be done in the West Bank is what should be done in Gaza, as opposed to what is currently being done in Gaza, which is a military operation that destroys any military capabilities of any group in those both those regions, and destroys any remnants of the culture that inspires such people and such movements. Such a military operation will result in many deaths, will result in many people being forced to leave. That's what happens when you start a war. You lose, and then you know, you get killed or potentially deported, and whoever is left, I think, should be living under military occupation for a very, very long time. And if and when they become civilized, and if and when there is a potential for, you know, real peace, that's a different story. And you know, then maybe I don't think it would affect the majority. But look, if Jews are not you know, under threat of killing wherever they go, whether it's Israel or outside of Israel, ideally we'd live in a world where there is no need for a Jewish majority state, in which case, yeah, that is a very, very long-term vision. I don't think we will see that in our lifetime, even if Israel did what's right. That's my answer, Jonathan.
Yes, I agree. I want to say something a bit different. This entire Palestinian Authority, Oslo thing is entirely the legacy now of Netanyahu. It's true that Rabin has started this, but Netanyahu has continued it, and he had every opportunity in his what is it, 18-year-old reign to uproot it and cancel the existence of the Palestinian Authority, and he hasn't done that. So that is the legacy of him. That and October 7th, of course. So what needs to be done is to basically go back to what it was before Oslo. And then we were way less attacks against Jews. If you cannot even compare what it used to be back then. Maybe Razi, you remember. I'm way too young to remember that, how things were then. But that's basically where we have to go. And the defeat has to be strong so that they will be pacified. And I think we might be, if we do it really strongly, I think we might be surprised how long it really takes for them to change. But I hope as soon as possible. This state of enduring the status quo, what Netanyahu has done, has basically made it a boiling, you should just refuse to do anything and just wait until you die so that it won't be on you. Something has to happen, because there's so many different forces here fighting. They all want the same thing. They all want to kill Jews. And if you're not going to do anything against that, you're going to get October 7th, and you will get something way worse if you will continue to not come to a final resolution to actually make a lasting change in how things are done in this region. So that's what needs to be done. There needs to be a change of disc. They need to change what strategy they are pursuing. So we have to uproot the Netanyahu legacy and the Rabin legacy. And to Rabin's credit, Razi would disagree with me there, but to Rabin's credit, he actually came with a vision. What is the vision of Netanyahu? Can somebody tell me? What does Netanyahu want?
Rabin had a vision, but that vision, I don't want to say the word that comes to mind. It's stupid. It's a
yes,
terrible
it's stupid,
vision.
but he had a vision. He had places he wanted to go to. There's at least something to aspire to. So,
He's gone to the place he wanted to go. We're there now.
I'm not saying it's a good place. I'm not saying I'm saying at least he had a place that he wanted to reach. He was a man of vision, as bad as the vision is. As much as Dostoevsky had terrible ideas, but he was a romantic writer. He wanted the possible and not the existing. And I think fundamentally Netanyahu is a naturalist, and Rabin was a romantic.
Well, I agreed with everything you said about Netanyahu's legacy. Netanyahu's legacy is almost like it's written by somebody who's gone too far in trying to present somebody making all the wrong decisions throughout the way, or alternatively, and somebody reading a book on how to do things, how to fight terrorism the right way, and deciding I'm going to do the exact opposite. Oddly enough, the author of that book is Netanyahu. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Thank you, Hannah, for the super chat. Hannah says over 500,000 Israelis in Judea and Samaria, no longer negotiable. Look, Israel showed that it can use, very strong force in Gaza when it decided to forcefully remove its citizens from there. Yeah, that was 8,000 people. This is a lot more. But no, don't underestimate the determination of the Israeli government in appeasing its enemies and its so-called allies. You will see real strength when that day comes, and unfortunately, if it does come, we're also going to see terrible aftermath. Thank you, Ram, for the super chat. Thank you, Roland, for the super chat. Roland says, Free Cyprus. Yes, depending on which part you mean. Richard.
Yeah, I think I wanted to, I'm not going to debate you on Israeli politics and previous leaders, etc. I'm going to go to a higher source, the UN. And the reason I'm going to do that is just because I referred to it earlier in terms of this report on occupation, which was a 169-page document, which together with my research into settler colonialism, I'm looking forward to throwing these notes in the trash along with the last few hours of my life. But anyway, the quote I wanted to pull out of this document, which lays out some of the thinking behind it, is it describes Israel as, quote, the wrongdoer, which needs to make reparations to the state of Palestine. And it refers to Israel's obligations of cessation and non-repetition, and the forms of reparations, which should include three things: restitution, compensation, and satisfaction. Now, this speaks to my earlier discourse on altruism, because when do you think that restitution, compensation, and the even woollier term satisfaction would be met by those that would be making these demands? Would they be met when every last billion is extracted? Would they be met when every last Jew is dead? I mean, what is the measure for such a for such an resolution? And I think one of the things that's key in the wider discussion that we're having is that often it seems that longevity or tradition of who lived in a certain area is used as the justification for that continuing forever. And these settler colonialists, for example, surely would have defended the rights of the Aztecs, were they still around, to sacrifice children, because that was their custom and they were indigenous. Surely the actions of the people is relevant as well. You can't occupy a land, no matter for how long, and simply fire rockets at your neighbors and not expect some repercussions from that, let alone October the 7th, of course.
Yeah, you mentioned UN. I'm going to mention even higher authority, God. Israel, we're not defending Israel because of a fictitious pact between God, who doesn't exist, and the people of Israel 2,000 years ago. The fact that Israel was created as a nation of people who respect individual rights has got priority over any other faction who wants to create destruction and death, as I said before. It's not an historic thing. It's not a traditional thing. It's about the purpose of the state of Israel, and that's why it's a clear winner in this contest. It's the clear choice that people with some rationality and some love for freedom should actually go behind, rather than trying to block them at every turn and try to make it impossible for them to defend themselves.
So somebody in the chat had a couple of comments. One of our haters said, "I will never forgive Israel from London." By the way, one thing, it's one thing that you have your despicable views, but can you please express them with punctuation so we know what it is exactly you're saying? It'll help your cause. Maybe we'll be convinced to support Hamas if you use a comma or a full stop from time to time. But earlier he says you have no right to take Palestinian land, and then continues into his spiel. It's interesting how these people, I mean, London is not the first place from which Jews had to escape, but it's interesting that these people think that the existence of Israel is stolen land. They should go back to where they came from, and where they came from is often these people's welcoming comments. So, in every way that they express themselves, they are showing that what they really want, even though they like to use the word genocide and accuse Israel of it, what they really want is the completion of the genocide started against the Jews by Hitler. We were talking, or maybe we weren't talking about, but one of the things that people complain about is how in the West Bank there are separate roads. There are separate roads for settlers, Jewish settlers. Only the Jews are allowed to go on these roads, and this sounds like apartheid. Jonathan, I'm not sure I want to go to you with this, considering what you've said in previous topics, but can you explain? I will correct if you're wrong. Can you explain why are there separate roads? Is this apartheid? Why does Israel want not let the Arabs drive on Jewish roads?
Well, those horrible roads. Those roads are designed for the safety of the Jews living in the settlements. For example, there's a settlement very close to the border, and for that, the people of the settlement won't have to pass through the border checkpoint every time they want to enter, to cross the Green Line. They can just go through that road, so they don't need to go through a border, so it saves them time. And the Palestinians, they have their own roads where there is a danger because of previous incidents of attacks against Jews. There was never a road, or also the wall. We can talk about the wall. Why is this big, scary wall surrounding, the West Bank, the Green Line? The reason is because there were a lot of attacks coming from these places against Jews. So for our protection, our government, using our own tax money, built that wall surrounding the Green Line. So that is why these things, they exist for the protection of Israel. And very much similarly to the Iron Dome, it's a very defensive, cowardly tactic to secure our citizens. We should, if we cannot maintain the road safely, perhaps we should go and check where that road leads to, what kind of people come from that road, and maybe deal with those threats there instead of building different roads and raising different walls. So the problem. It's just a symptom of Israel's disease of inability, utter inability to conclude this conflict. So that's why we have Rose.
Yeah, I agree with you on Iron Dome. I would extend that to the wall. You said, why is there this big scary wall because Jews were attacked? Well, no, it's because Israel doesn't want to do offensively what it must do because its enemies and its so-called allies around the world will be upset with it. So, yeah, ideally, you wouldn't have that wall. You would just have a population that would not dream of trying to kill Jews because they know that the result for them would be the worst imaginable. But that is not the case. The result for them when they try to kill Jews is even more humanitarian aid, so-called humanitarian aid, than they were already getting, which was already the highest in the world per capita. Richard.
I think a lot of the points that are omitted when people are discussing this issue include things like, for example, the post-disengagement, the fact that disengagement took place even in 2005, the fact that all Jews were removed from Gaza in 2005 and the Palestinians were left to it. That's certainly erased from this. It's erased the fact that even Egypt has a border with Gaza. For example, it's as if Israel manages to surround every land border of Gaza itself, and that therefore it's contained entirely by Israel. Now that just drops a key piece of factual geography, and I think also the Palestinian leadership's opportunities for peace deals in the past, which they've shaken hands on and then gone back on. And we've spoken about the Oslo Accords, for example, not necessarily the best solution, but look at what happened after that. That itself is erased. It's as if no such deal was ever on the table. I think one of the other things I just wanted to encourage people to watch is on the sister channel to this, the Briefly Objective. A little while ago, the philosopher Harry Binswanger did a short video that's on there called "This Is Not Arab Land," which I encourage people to watch. And in the course of that video, he makes a good point about the fact that it's individuals that own land, not states. And that's one point that's often missed in this, is that it's people who have bought land and owned it and worked it that is relevant, and that states don't own land as such. He makes the point better than I just managed to summarize, but I encourage you to watch that, because that's gives another extra point in this.
And of course, Israel is so keen in occupying parts of the Middle East that he actually returned the whole of the peninsula of Sinai, which won during the 67 war, to Egypt. And at the same time, Egypt refused to take back Gaza. And that's why Gaza happened to be under Israel control. But I wanted to add something to what Razi said about the funding of the channel, that if the trolls want to contribute, they're more than welcome to leave super thanks so they can keep genociding grammar and make their silly points. And going back to the to the ownership of the land, yeah, ultimately it's only individual who can decide to the individual have the right to live their life free, and this freedom determines the self-government effectively allows themselves to dictate how to live. And free individual may freely choose to get together and form a state or something, a sort of government, a sort of self-government, which makes legitimate and again protect individual rights and furthers the civilization effectively. Gazans, Palestinians choose not to do that. At every turn, they choose to put all the aid that they get from the international community to use it in order to build weapons and missiles to constantly attack Israel. They choose to dig tunnel and create a machinery of war with the sole purpose of making sure Israel wouldn't survive. If they change their frame of mind, if they decided to start working for their own interest in order to make their own life better and collaborate with Israel rather than try and destroy Israel all the time, that would be a step towards a peaceful future. But of course, that's not going to happen, and as Razi said, until that culture is squashed, just like happened in Germany and Japan after the Second War. This culture have to be totally defeated. They have to recognize they've been defeated, and they have to start from scratch under the supervision of the winner. And the winner in this case will have to be the state and the society which has the moral high ground, which is closer to the protection of individual right. By any means, Israel is not perfect. Unfortunately, there's a big religious dimension into Israel, but they nonetheless managed to look over that and again be the most civilized country and the freer country, the most prosperous countries in the Middle East. And that's not an accident. If you foster freedom of your people, if you protect individual rights in your state for your population, you will be richer, you'll be freer, you'll be happier.
Yeah, I want to second your point, Marco, about we encourage not just our supporters, but also our trolls to send us super chats. And I assume most of our trolls are socialists. So as you would say, when you advocate for government taxing the rich, we will spend that money better than you will. But I do want to point out that we do not guarantee that we're going to read every super chat. We try to read them all, but if we get trolling super chats, we will leave it to our discretion as to whether or not it is something we want to read. Rotua says, so you guys agreed with Chuck Schumer about Israel government? No, I mean, it's completely out of context. You know, we had this question about Russia. Was Russia treating, torturing the terrorists? Was that a good thing? And you know, the answer, you know, Morgan gave that answer in the last show that we got it, which is, you know, Russia is not a legitimate government. So their very existence is illegitimate. Out of context, if a legitimate country were to arrest, you know, arrest terrorists, yes, they can torture them as much as needed. Now, Chuck Schumer's statement, I don't agree with it. I don't want Netanyahu in power, but I certainly don't agree with what Chuck Schumer would have instead of Netanyahu. I think that would be worse, and worse than that, considering his position, he should not be making such a statement. That is a statement that the U.S. does not make about, you know, dictatorships, about any country, but it makes about Israel and its elected government. I think, you know, I would like to see the Israeli people choose someone better. I would be happy to see the Likud party fire Netanyahu and have somebody from their party right now without an election become prime minister. But I absolutely do not want the United States telling Israel, look, your people voted one way, but you need a do-over because you didn't get the result that we wanted. All right, we have a few minutes left. Jonathan, any parting comments?
I want to say just something about the colonizing thing. So first of all, my grandfather was born in Frankfurt and went on a ship in 1939, escaping for his life from Germany to Israel. Did not come here to colonize. He did not come here for anything like it. He came here to save his life. And that is what the vast majority of Jews, they escaped here. And the other ones who came here, they came here because they wanted to build a new country for nothing. So everybody who came here because for a positive purpose of establishing a free, prosperous country out of nothing, because there was nothing here, and majority of them just escaped for their lives. And another thing to note, there's absolutely nothing to be colonized here. There's no oil, there's no gold, there's no diamonds, there's nothing nice to colonize from Hebron. There's literally nothing there. It's like an ugly desert. There's really nothing there. There's no. Did Israel took you know, the people? We didn't have slaves. There's what did Israel ever gain materially from colonizing these poor Arab tribes? If we did, show us. You know, the Czechs, the English, they colonized the Indians. You know, we know the English benefited a few things from India, right? What did Israel benefit from this colonization? That's my question for the people of that advocate for that. And I would also add, to answer all these professors that you've been reading, unfortunately for you, Richard, is it true? Is what you're advocating true? Because they don't believe in truth. They're saying the truth is it's relational. It's my truth. It's their truth. So is there any meaning to what they're saying at all? All of that is BS, and you can dismiss it from that.
And the other outcome of it is to negate free will, to negate people's rights as individuals to control and decide their own lives in their own lifetime. They're not part of a larger collective. They're not part of a genealogical history that outweighs what they do now themselves. And how you live your life is the ultimate result of that. And that speaks to what your granddad or great granddad you just referred to was doing in his lifetime.
Yeah. Faced with a choice to survive or to die, people with with some spine and some will to live, some determination and some rationality behind them will choose to live and thrive. And the people who choose to go the other direction because they worship death, well, we see what kind of disaster they perpetrate.
I just want to say there was a comment in the chat saying torture is horrible practice. It has an unacceptable risk to produce bad intel. It is fundamentally disrespectful to humanity. I mean, the first point I've heard, I don't buy it. You hold the person until you discover whether or not the intel works. But the second point, what's fundamentally disrespectful to humanity is mass rape, mass murder, the atrocities committed on October 7th. That is fundamentally disrespectful to humanity. And if you do that, you have no claim on your own. You have no right to your own life. You certainly have no right to be comfortable. And you have no right to say, don't treat me too badly when you're trying to get out more information from me about how my brothers in arms are going to carry out the next attack. So yeah, they, as far as I'm concerned, if that is done to the October 7th terrorists, they absolutely get what they deserve. We're out of time. Yonatan, where can people find more from you?
In my Substack, philosophyIneeded.com, link in the description.
Marco, Richard?
Check out the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this. Details are in the description below for shorter content, it says, and there's a link to it where you can find video edited clips from these shows that get to the point in only a few minutes. I'm
at Razi Ginzberg on X. Ayn Rand Center UK members and YouTube members. The Fountainhead Book Club, which is about to wrap up, is starting right after we go off the air, and details about the book club that follows we will announce them soon. But well, let's just say it's a big one, bigger than the Fountainhead, at least physically. I'm not going to say any more. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.